This is a near complete and quite thorough guide to making a pair of patterned bespoke trousers. I'm using a tartan, and these were my golden shears submission. The way I'm doing things and matching the pattern is what I would normally do. The techniques can be taken and applied in different ways to better suit yourself if there's a particular effect you're going for. This part is cutting the cloth, and the following part is going to be actually sewing the trousers together, though I'll be glossing over a lot that is not directly relating to matching the patterns, so I suggest, if this is your first time here, going and familiarizing yourself with earlier content such as trouser making. I'm making a companion guide to this video as well that, hopefully winds up in the description at some point. That's just a written version of the video. Start with making sure the cloth is folded properly, that the check or the stripe is even on the top and bottom fold of the fabric. This is to prepare and make later steps easier. It might not seem necessarily necessary, but like I say, it's just for simplifying in the future. Another thing is to check that the cloth is not twisted, i.e. that the grains of the cloth and the checks or stripe are straight, that the lines are not wavy. It can be looked at next to a ruler, and the cloth can be moved to be made straight. If the cloth is twisted before striking the pattern, it can disfigure the trousers and ruin the pattern matching, as well as the actual pattern. It's especially important down the center front crease and grain line of the trousers. With my current preferred trouser lay, the selvage is closer to me and the top side of the trouser goes on the bottom left of the cloth, as I stand facing it. Measuring about 12 centimeters or 5 inches from the raw edge for straight hems so that I can see how close the edge of the trouser can be placed. This is just for the amount of inlay I want to leave beyond the hem. It can be more or less. In the most basic terms, the only thing that needs to happen is the center front crease goes halfway through any vertical pattern. This is so that when the crease is put into the trouser, any slight deviation isn't as visible as it would be if the crease was placed exactly onto a stripe or vertical stripe. In the most basic terms, the only thing that needs to happen is the center front crease goes halfway between any vertical pattern. This is so that when the crease is put into the trouser, any slight deviation isn't as visible. Placing the crease between the vertical stripes instead of on a stripe means that the deviation is more difficult to see. Placing it evenly between the stripes will give the finished trouser a more even aesthetic, since the vertical pattern will be even on both sides of the crease, if there is one. The vertical position of the top side generally doesn't matter unless you'd like it to. It can be placed economically with only 15 centimeters or 5 inches of inlay below the hem, or raised so that the horizontal stripes sit across the fly area in a specific way. In this case, with the bold stripes, I wanted 2 of them to sit across the front as evenly as possible. The underside needs to match horizontally across the knee. The balance points at the knee can be lined up, and some of the checks on either side of the knee on the underside and the top side can be marked onto the underside paper. When the check is lined up horizontally below the knee, it can be struck. If there is enough cloth, it can be possible to match the pattern further. The edge of the outleg at the knee and the hem can be placed onto the vertical stripes in the same way as the hem and knee of the top side outleg. It is not explicit here, but the underside should be given extra inlay at the waistline to help match the pattern up to the waistband on the outleg. If the trouser has normal inlay, that will be sufficient though. Worth saying here that it was simpler to show striking a plain fronted trouser, but I wanted a double forward pleated trouser, but the same principles apply. To cut the cloth, it is cut one layer at a time. This is the same no matter what is being cut, jacket, waistcoat or trouser. Follow the chalk as we normally do to cut out the trouser using all the normal principles of cutting. When the first layer is cut, the cloth around the piece needs to be moved out of the way so that the second layer's pattern is exposed. We have to make sure the pattern of the piece we just cut around matches the second layer of cloth. The first is then used as a template to cut around the second layer of cloth. Matching the top and bottom layer of cloth initially makes this step more easy, but no matter how perfectly the layers might be lined up, it is still prudent to cut them separately so that the patterns can be verifiably the same. Something that is by no means necessary is cutting the entire topside first and placing it onto the underside with the outleg seams together as a final test that the checks will be lined up. Again, it's the same, cutting out one layer at a time. Equally important to mark the grain arrows down excess cloth that gets cut off. Typically, checks will be slightly rectangular instead of square, so if we can avoid having to look and see which way around the cloth is supposed to be, then that just simplifies fitting up and things and such like. Despite having the checks, it can still be a good idea to notch the knee points. Should we want to make an alteration, we can see where the knee is still. Fitting up, I'll start with the fly-in bearer. Taking an appropriately sized piece of cloth, only the horizontal pattern really needs to be lined up. Placing the top side onto the cloth, lining up the grain and lining up the horizontal patterns across it. There will generally be no aesthetic benefit, however the vertical pattern goes on. Copying the top side information and making the fly-in bearer as normal. Minor imperfections can be sorted when it's sewn, but now get it close to simplify that. For the pocket facings, it is important that the pattern is perfectly lined up, so that the patterns can be matched all the way to the top of the side seam. It will also look more aesthetic that the pattern isn't crooked at all. The big facing is drawn up as normal after the pattern is matched. It is a much smaller piece, so we can rely on putting the layers correctly on top of each other and cutting as one. The small facing that would be used with some methods of pocket making can be cut out only matching the horizontal check. because it is not a continuation of what is seen, but it can become apparent if the stripes don't continue around the seam. In this case, I did match it horizontally and vertically, but I think there was no huge advantage to that. The waistband is as simple as finding out how you want the stripe or check to go along the cloth. It is always going down the warp along the same grain as the trouser legs. If it is striped, then the line will just be continuous around the waist. With checks, still down the warp. Depending on what you are working with, it can be pleasant to have a portion of the vertical check to sit evenly along the waistband width. To do this properly, it is mostly done when making, not cutting. I do something completely unnecessary when I have a check. I match the vertical check closest to the fly with one of the checks on the waistband. I do this by marking the seam allowance from the fly onto the trouser. Take the cloth being used as the waistband and lining up one of the patterns. Again, checked patterns are typically rectangular, so the check will only line up vertically. Marking the seam allowance onto the waistband cloth. A waistband pattern can be placed with the center front mark onto the seam allowance to draw on the rest of the waistband. I also mark the 6 cm or 2 1/4 width of the waistband plus seam allowance. Each edge is even both sides of one of the stripes running down the warp. It doesn't have to be cut two sides at this stage. It can be cut down after it is sewn neatly to the banderole canvas. For hip pockets, as the welt would be cut on the straight grain, there is little use matching the pattern. Similar for the bearer. It can be matched, but if darts are interfering with the pocket opening, then it could be futile. I suggest cutting them indiscriminately unless you would like them to match in some specific way.